Oh my goodness, I had so much fun today making a handful of exquisite gifts, all made out of men's silk ties. It's so much fun, and the gifts are just beautiful and useful, and they're all just so lovely. So I think this is my favorite gift video ever. I hope you love this one. Hello everybody, welcome to Catherine Sews. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today I'm looking at using old ties to make some beautiful gifts. I've thrifted 13 or 14 ties, so I thrifted them, brought them home, kind of bundled them up 2 or 3 at a time into a lingerie bag, and then threw them right into the wash. And they really came out nicely. If you wanted to wear them as a tie, again, I don't know if that's the best way to do it. Some of them did come out a little bit mangled in the interfacing, but the fabric itself came out really perfect. The things that I want to make today are an Obi-Style belt, a small jewelry case that folds up for traveling, a scarf using 4 different ties, a couple of little pouches, one that's just big enough to hold a credit card and keys, one that is just made out of triangles and is a beautiful little gift pouch. And then a shoulder bag, like just a small crossbody purse. Other things you might want for these projects are maybe some sew-on snaps or these cute little plastic snaps that are actually just so easy to put on, or these magnetic ones. You have to plan ahead a little bit for these and for the plastic snaps. But if you forget to plan ahead, you can also use these sew-in magnetic buttons, which are really fun. I'll leave a link to all of these in the description. They're all great to have on hand for projects like this. So the Obi-Style belt is the only one where I don't need to open up the ties. I'm going to be using them as they are, and it's also the most beginner friendly. So why don't we start with that one? So this beautiful Obi belt is by far the most simple project on our list today. It's basically just 2 ties that are joined, and so the only sewing is right here where they overlap. I think I'm going to sew mine by hand so that the stitches don't show at all, but because it's a belt and you're going to be kind of yanking on it and pulling it tight, I think I'm going to put some stitches on the machine inside just to secure the 2 together. So it'll be really anchored at the machine and then finished off nicely with hand sewing. So the only things you're going to need for this are your regular machine, some pins, and a needle and thread. So I slipped my pins in this under layer, and so they're going through both ties. I'll keep the back of the bottom one out of the way so that it's just as neat as I can make it. I'll just do a back tag there just to really anchor it. I've got that beautiful celadon green in the top thread, and then I'm just putting in a black bobbin so that even when you peer inside and in the back of the belt, it's going to look nice. So I'm moving the back out of the way. I'm kind of going into this little pocket here. As long as it's laying flat, I can do a back tack there that's going to just give me that security. So one on that side, and then one over here, and again, back of this one needs to get out of the way, and the front of this one needs to get out of the way. Good. So it looks nice and neat from the inside. And now I can just do that bit of hand sewing. I'm just going to work with a single strand. I'm going to work in between these layers like that. So I don't want to just have my knot on the back of the fabric like that. I want it hidden. So I will start a little bit down and come out at the fold. And then little small stitches that kind of weave in between the layers. So just like that, just picking up a little bit of the upper tie and the under one. There we go. On the outside, the stitches don't show at all, and hopefully they don't show on the inside either. So if I fold one tie even with the other, there we go, that's it. So just little stitches all the way around. And then that's it. And when I come all the way back around to where I started, I want to hide my knot underneath as well. And then I'll put my needles in and come out on the back. Pull that thread tight when I cut so that the tail of thread disappears. And then all my stitches are invisible. I'll give that a little quick steam, and that just looks so nice. Okay, and there's our final belt. Like that was very easy, fast, and it really is pretty. So normally when I have a lot of stitch picking to do, I just sit in front of a movie or I scroll on my phone. But you know what I've been doing lately that is so much better, it's such a better use of my time, is I've been putting on a short course on Skillshare. And I just want to thank Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. There's so many courses on Skillshare and they're taught by really excellent teachers. I actually tried Skillshare before, but I just didn't have the time to give it. But now that I've retired from my teaching job and I'm just living my best creative life, I've actually found this is the perfect time for me to get into so many different creative pursuits. So there are classes on Skillshare that I can take that help me with things that I'm interested at this point in my life. There are even some courses on upcycling and even some on using ties. But one that I just recently got really into was about a Japanese concept called Ikigai, which is about finding your purpose in life and helping others find their purpose. And I think that that's so important at this point in life. If you're like me and you're kind of getting toward the end of your career, kind of entering into retirement, it's so beautiful to reflect on what is your purpose here in life. And so I've really been enjoying that course. But there are so many courses on there. I need to get better at filming video and editing video and also managing money as a retired person. There's loads of courses for every interest that you might have. So the first 500 people to use my link in the description or scan the QR code will get a free 1-month trial of Skillshare. So you can get started today. Alrighty, so for the little jewelry case like this, I'm going to be using one tie and I'll be able to get it out of the skinny end of the tie. On the little prototype, I sewed in a little hand sewn snap like that, just like these ones. But on my finished product, I think I will use these really cute plastic snaps. They come in a kit with the pliers and an awl, which is really handy. And I'm going to use a fusible interfacing. I've cut this to be the same width as the narrowest part of the tie. So that's 3 inches and it just barely fits on there. The total length of your interfacing is 40 inches long, or 152.5 centimeters long. I'll need my ruler and a rotary cutter and scissors with a good point. I'll need a pen with 2 different colors in it. Alrighty, so the first thing I'm going to do is run to the iron and iron my interfacing down onto the wrong side of my tie. So with that interfacing fused on, now I can take my rotary cutter and just trim it off even with that interfacing. It's hard to cut little bits like this with scissors. So in this case, I think a rotary cutter is ideal. And you could use your ruler to make sure that those lines are really nice and straight. But as always with a rotary cutter, use a big thick ruler like this. Never use your rotary cutter beside a thin ruler. That is super dangerous. So this jewelry case has 4 little pockets in there, and then it all rolls up so nicely. So to make those pockets, they're just done with pleats, and we're going to draw those pleat lines on the wrong side of the tie. And that's why I want you to have 2 different colors of pen. So just starting at one end, doesn't matter which end, I'm going to just draw seam allowance at the end. So I'm going to use 1/2 inch seam allowance at the bottom here. So that's my blue line. And then I'm using a 6-inch wide ruler, which makes it really handy. I'm going to draw 3 lines that are now 6 inches apart. So there's one. I can use the lines on my table to make sure my ruler is perpendicular to the tie. There's just seam allowance and then 6 inches or 15 centimeters. And then another 6 inches or 15 centimeters and a third 6 inches or 15 centimeters. So now in red, I'm going to draw a line 3.5 inches or 9 centimeters from that seam allowance line. So 3.5 inches from there with my red. And now I'm going to go 6 inches again. 6 inches or 15 centimeters. 3 times. Now I'm going to just draw myself an arrow that goes from the red line to the blue, from the red line to the blue, from the red line to the blue, and from the red line to the blue. So that end of the tie is ready to go to the iron, and we're going to form all those pleats. But before we go there, let's do a little bit of planning ahead for the snap we're going to be using. If you do the hand sewn snaps, you don't have to plan ahead. You can just snap that wherever it wants to go. But if you want to use these really cute plastic snaps, which are actually really easy to use, by the way, then this end one can still go on at the last minute. But this one, we have to plan ahead because it doesn't go through all the layers. It can't go through that pocket or else the pocket won't work. So where we need to put it is 6.5 inches from the opposite end. So this is 6.5 inches or 16.5 centimeters. And right in the center, right there. So I wondered why these snaps came with these plastic tweezers until I started digging around in there, and I realized as soon as you dig around with your big fingers, they all go flying. And so these tweezers really help with that a lot. So at this point now, I can choose which color I want to do. For this one, it's a no-brainer, isn't it? That pale pink is just perfect. Once I've made my choice, then I need to find the 4 parts. So 2 of them are just like the button. And then there's a male part and a female part as well. You want those 4 different parts. And I'm just going to start with a button and one of the inside parts. It doesn't matter if I use the male or the female to start with, but as long as I have 2 opposites. Alrighty, then on the back at the mark I made, I'll use all that comes with the kit. And that's nice and handy. And I'll just poke that right through. And then take the button from the wrong side and push that through. And then my inside part goes on top. Yep, the flat side down. Good. And then I take the pliers, and that little black cup is just going to hold the button right in there. And then you just give a little squish. These are really so easy. Okay, that's it. That is in place for us for when we're ready for it at the end. So now we're just going to go to the iron. So at the iron, here's my button at that far end. And I'm going to start with the red line that's just about dead center. And I'm going to pick it up there and fold it right on that red line. And then follow the arrow. Bring that red line to the blue line. Nice and straight and even. And give that a good press. And then again, the next red line, I'll fold on there and then follow the arrow and bring that red line to the blue line. Nice and straight and even. And give it a press. Third time, fold on the red, follow the arrow, bring it to the blue, there. And the last time. And this one comes right down to that seam allowance. Now we're actually going to be sewing at a little bit less, probably sew it at 1/4 inch, but it's nice to have a little bit of leeway there so that you're sewing below the edge of that pocket. All right, so there's our 4 little pockets. So nice. Either clip them or pin them on both sides. And now we're going to flip that over. Look how cute the pockets look. And now this free end should be, like, just to double check, that free end from the top of that top pocket, you should have 15.5 inches or 39.5 centimeters. So now this long free end is going to come right down over and cover it. And then we're going to switch these clips so that they're now holding all the layers. Good. And it should feel nice and flat. And now this edge is already in the fold, so I don't have to sew there. What I want to do is come straight down here at about that 1/4 inch or edge of the presser foot seam allowance and just turn the corner. And then I'm going to leave a gap and then come up the other side, just like that. Okay. And you can double check by rolling it up. There's the back of my button. This flap is going to come over, so that seems like that's just going to be perfect. So starting at that folded edge,
don't know why this edge got a little skinny, but it'll still get caught in my seam allowance. I can feel the edge of that pocket right underneath there, and I want to come down past the edge of that bottom pocket and just turn the corner and just come in a little ways and just secure with a back tack. Just like that. I think your corners look a little bit better when you go around the corner rather than leaving the whole end open. Nice clean pivots there. So now we just have to flip it right side out. These corners are going to be a square going into a square, so I don't have to trim off too much, but a little bit helps. But the bottom corners, all of that seam allowance has to pack into that corner, so I'll trim a little more closely there. And now we can turn it right side out through that little gap. And you can see the pockets are here. Just gotta get nice pointy corners on the ends. We're looking good. So you can use a chopstick or a knitting needle and just go right up into those corners. Nice and pointy. You can use a point turner. Okay. All right. That looks amazing. And now we're going to go back to the iron so that it actually does look amazing. So you can see it's going to roll up like this. This end's going to come down and snap. How cute. So these little ends, I just want to tuck those in nice and neat. And you can either do a little bit of an edge stitch there on the machine, or you could do a ladder stitch by hand. I think the ladder stitch is a little bit neater, so I think I'll do that. Okay, so cute. So I've got my needle and thread, and I'm going to hide my knot inside one of the folds there, and I'm going to bring my needle out right at the fold. Everything gets tucked in, and then it's just little small stitches. You travel inside the fold and go straight back across, travel inside the fold on the other side, and just back and forth like that. So you really don't see the stitches because you're doing all of the traveling inside the fold and then just hopping straight across to the other side. A little bit of a knot at the end. And then before I cut my thread, I'm just going to put my needle in, come out anywhere so that that tail of thread is inside and no tail of thread on the outside. Looking good. Okay, here's the final step. We're going to roll that up nice and neat. This side comes down. It's so cute. And now with my friction pen or some other erasable means, I will just mark a dot where I want that final snap to sit. Okay, how exciting. Last step. I'm going to poke that hole with the awl right through all the layers this time. I want the button on that side, on the outside. And then my opposite inside piece goes here. Before I squeeze that, I'm going to double check. Yes, that is correct. Button goes in the black part and just a little squeeze. So you can pop all of your jewelry into each of those little pockets. This is just so cute for travel. And then they just all roll up and you can just snap it closed. Like, how sweet. I just love that little project. That is so cute. So for the scarf, the only thing I need are 4 ties that all look kind of harmonious together. And I need my clips. I really don't need anything else for this project. So I've got them laying the full length of my table. I'm just going to sew these together. So I'll flip one to be right side together with the next one and start clipping with them being corner to corner and with everything just laying nicely. I just want to make sure that neither of them is being stretched because the bias of ties is so stretchy, right? So I just want to try to not stretch them and just clip them together or pin them together evenly. Now, not all ties are exactly the same length. So I noticed that these two are quite different in length. So I've got them lined up at the other end so that the excess that I'll be cutting off is the narrow end rather than losing all of this beautiful silk at that end. Anytime you do have one that's longer than the other, have the narrower end hanging off the edge. No, on second thought, I'm just going to sew one of these pairs together. So now as I go, I just want to make sure my edges stay together because they are slippery. And then I want to press those seams open and flat. Just like that for the whole length. With this one nicely pressed and laying right side up, now I want to plan the other side. And so I'm laying this tie with the wide end against the wide end, right side together. It's a little unintuitive. If you sew two pairs the same way, then you can't put them right side together. Even if you flip it end to end, you have to sew them the opposite sides together. So yes, trust me on that one because I did learn that the hard way. These are the edges that I want to sew together now. And I'll sew it and press it the exact same way that I sewed the first one. So again, edges together all the way down. And then again, press those seams open. So now I have my two pairs of ties and they are opposite. I've got the narrower ones on the outside and the wider ones on the inside. So now you'll be able to see what I mean, that when I put these together, that end works. That's correct. So I can get it right side together. But then the other end also works. So that's what I meant before, that if you don't plan it out to be opposites like that, neither end works. But now I can use either one. So I want to take a minute and get them laying on top of each other nicely. And again, you have to just be careful not to stretch that bias fabric. I will be cutting off the ends of the narrow ones, but before I cut anything, I want to kind of clamp or pin them together all the way around, just so I know everybody is happy. So this one is sort of my limiting factor. I'm going to cut straight even with that one. And then on this side, I'll just follow this edge, just like that. There. So that gives a nice point to the scarf without losing more silk than you have to lose, right? That's sort of the minimum amount that I can cut off. And then you guessed it, we're going to be sewing all around the whole thing, but we'll leave a gap, maybe around the narrow part here. So I'll put double clips to remind me to leave a gap there. Good, and again, the smaller side can face up so that I know exactly where to trim it. And then I'll follow this edge all the way up through the narrow end. The silk just feels luxurious. I love these patterns together. I'm just in love with this already. So I found my two sets of double clips and I'll start at one set. And go all the way around until I get to the other set of double clips. And I'll do nice clean pivots on all the corners. Make sure my seam allowances stay open the way I press them. Now I'm going to trim off around all four of those corners, especially around the sharper points. Oh, I guess there's actually 6 corners, aren't there? All right, fantastic. So now I'm just going to reach in through that gap I can make sure that I don't have any holes, no missed edges. Pull that out. Oh, it's so pretty. It's just so elegant. I love that it's such a feminine way to bring the elegance of a necktie. Oh, that's just so beautiful. We'll go to the iron. We'll press that gap nice and flat. We'll press the points, and then we just have to close up the gap. And the gap is big enough that I can get my whole hand in there with a point turner, and I can gently poke out 3 points on each end. Good. Oh, yes, I love it. So now to press these points, you really want to push that seam all the way out to the edge. And same for the long edges, just kind of roll it back and then push the seam out to the edge. At the gap here, I'll just tuck those edges in, and you can sew that with a little edge stitch on the machine or with a ladder stitch by hand. It's going to be at the back of the scarf, so it will be kind of hidden. So if you wanted to do an edge stitch on your machine, that's probably fine. So I think I will just do the little edge stitch here. It's really never going to be seen. But of course you want a good matching thread for this. So that little edge is just fine. So this one is done. How lovely. And my favorite way to tie this is just like a men's tie. So this is my prototype of this cute little wristlet pouch. It's just big enough to tuck in a credit card, some coins, some bills, and a key, maybe a chapstick, and it's just such a cute little thing. I think that's such a nice gift. So to make this, you just need part of a tie. So I'm just using the wide end, and I'm going to interface it. So this is a fusible interfacing, and it's just a soft tricot interfacing. You can use something a little bit stiffer if you want to. And then we're going to need a zipper, but we're going to do this fun way of putting a zipper like a continuous loop there. It's really fun to try that, but your zipper has to be twice the length, but you only need one side of it. So I would say for this, your zipper would have to be at least 12 inches long. Mine is much longer. So I think the easiest way to cut the silk is to interface it first. I want to end up cutting a piece that's 4 inches by 10 inches here. So I can just go ahead and interface that. That's going to give me plenty for my 4 inches by 10. And then with my scrap of soap, I can draw on that dark interfacing. And then I also need a piece for the strap. One idea, I'm only going to be using one side of the zipper, so you really could use the other side of your zipper as the strap. But for this, I think I will cut a separate piece. So I'm going to cut it 1.5 inches wide by about 10 again. 10 or even up to 12 if you want. I'll cut it 12, and then I can always trim it down shorter if I want. Okay, so the first thing I need is actually the strap. So I'm going to take it to the iron and press it into 4s. So I'll start by pressing it right in half. And already I'm glad I interfaced this because it's nice and crisp. When I open that out, now I see that crease in the middle. Bring my edge into the crease. And the second edge into the crease as well. And then in half again. So now I just want to sew nice and close to those two edges to seal this up. Okay, just like that, we've got our little strap. Okay, so this is probably the only time that I'll use my serger today, but I did just go ahead and serge around all four sides. Now, if you don't have a serger, that is no problem at all. You can just zigzag around all four sides. So now I'm going to take that rectangle and fold it in half and find the very center of one of the long edges. And then I'll take my strap and fold it in half. And you know what? That 12-inch piece that is now 6 inches on the fold, that seems like a good length to me. So I'm glad I went with 12. I'm going to lay this edge right on top of my serging and just give a little back tack right there. This strap is coming down onto the rectangle, onto the right side, and I'll just give a little back tack. Just like that. And now we run to the iron. So there we go. Now I'm going to flip this and bring the strap out and press that edge down like that. So that's just about a 1/4 inch turn, maybe a smidge more, a little less than a centimeter. So here comes that zipper. I'm going to lay my edge right beside the teeth and I'll point my pins away from me. With the zipper foot, I'm just going to do a little edge stitch right there. This inner edge of my presser foot is going to go right beside the teeth of the zipper. And I'll just go right through that strap as if it's not even there. Okay, that'll do. We have to cut the zipper anywhere and then slide that slider all the way off. And now we're going to be putting the slider back on. So I kind of want to line up these edges. So this is a bit of a tricky thing. I've tried teaching this many, many times, and some people get it and some people just don't get it. It's fiddly. There is something I've seen online with a fork. I don't know how to make the fork work, but if you've seen that, you can give that a try. I want to cut this now kind of on an angle so that the side on my right is shorter than the side on my left. Just like that. So you can use an actual zipper or you can use continuous zipper for this. It's the same now. So the rounded edge of the zipper goes on first and it goes on to the left. And that's the easy part. Now I want to stick that corner of the right-hand side in and try to snuggle it in there. And then with my 2 middle fingers, I'm going to hold the zipper tape here. And, oh, that's really all there is to it. And hopefully I'm lined up enough there. Yeah, I think so. Isn't that cute? That is adorable. Now see how the zipper is twisting like that? It doesn't love being fed onto itself, but I can actually press that flat. So on the back here, the teeth are a little bit more protected. I don't have to worry about melting the teeth. So it's a little less twisted. But by the time I sew that end closed, you won't notice any twist to it at all. And now we just have to sew 2 little seams. To be able to turn it through later, I'm going to leave a gap there. I'll open up that zipper a little bit. If you forget, there is a workaround where you just pinch it through the layers. Never try to just pull the zipper open though. Okay, and then with it like that, I'm going to tuck this all inside out. Make sure the strap stays out of the way, and I'm going to sew these edges together. And then tuck in the strap again, because now I'm coming across this end. This is the seam I just sewed. I'll just open up the seam allowance like that and lay the seam right on top of the zipper teeth. And then we just sew straight across there. That is it. At the zipper teeth, you can just sew right over these nylon coil zippers. And in fact, I'm going to do a little back tack over there just to make sure it's strong. That, my friends, is it. I'll trim off threads, trim off the ends of the zippers, and then it turns right side out. I'll use my corner poker to poke out pointy corners at the end of the zipper on that seam, and a pointy corner opposite the strap. And there we go. There's our adorable little wristlet. Isn't that the cutest thing? I will take it to the iron and give it a little press on this bottom edge. I don't really want to press this end flat, but I do want everything else to kind of get a little bit of a press. That is cute. Oh, I love that. That is just such a cute little gift. So this is my prototype, and it's definitely the most labor intensive. I just made this out of denim and some quilting cotton, and I just put that hard on for fun. I think with all the different patterns that are going to go into the final product, I probably won't do an embellishment here, but I love this little bag. It's got 2 big pockets and 1 smaller pocket. It's nice and small, like a crossbody strap. I'm going to take this same material for the strap, but I'm going to cover it in a strip from one of the ties, just to make it a little bit more beautiful. The only other thing we'll need for this is a closure. You can use those sew-in snaps that I showed before, or the plastic snaps that I showed before. Those plastic snaps would work well because they can just go through those layers here. You don't even really need to plan ahead for those. I recently found these sew-on magnet buttons, and so I've been having fun with those. I like those. They're fun. So that's what I used here. I'll leave a link for those in the description as well, but either one would work. So for this one, we're going to need also 5 ties, at least 5. If I do the strap, that'll take most of a tie in itself. But for most of the ties, I only need the wide end. We're also going to be drafting out the pattern for this. I'm going to take you through it. It's not difficult, but you will need some computer paper or longer paper if you have it, and rulers, a pencil. And if you are using computer paper, it's not quite long enough, so we'll need to tape it together. So I'm going to just tape 2 pieces together. So I do want to make sure that's nice and straight. And as you can see here, we're drawing one line that's 5 1/4 inches or 13 centimeters from the edge. And that needs to be a total of 14 inches long. 14 inches or 36 centimeters long. I'm going to use my paper rotary cutter, but just a reminder again to use a heavy ruler, not the little thin see-through ruler. And then we'll need one other piece that's just a little bit longer than a computer paper. I want to have a piece that's the same 5 1/4 inches wide, but this time I only need it 12 inches long. So this one is also 5 1/4 inches or 13 centimeters, but it's only 12 inches or 30 centimeters. Good. The longer one, 14-inch long one, we're going to fold it in half. And these are all of these pieces, and we need 1, 2, and 3 of them. And we're just going to round off that bottom corner, not the folded corner. We'll leave that one as is, but it's the other corners that we're going to come in about 1/2 inch and round that off. So I'm just marking in 1/2 inch there, 1/2 inch there, kind of on the angle. And then I'm going to take a fairly narrow coffee cup, and that gives me just about the perfect curve. Oh, there we go. We want that same curve on the bottom, but we're going to do a slightly bigger curve on the top. So let's just stack all these. Then we'll put a couple of paper clips. And then with paper scissors, we can just cut those all even. Okay, so this one is ready. And what we need from this one, we need to cut 3. All right, this one, we just want to create this shape, and it's just a little bit more of a curve. So for that one, I just brought a little bowl so that we're coming in more or less like an inch there. And it comes in a little bit more than we did on the bottom. And then we'll cut that off. This is 2 layers. So for this one, we have to cut 2. So that's why we need 5 ties. And that doesn't even get us the strap. And I'm also thinking about finishing these edges off with a nice piping. So that would be a 6th tie for the strap because it's long. So as I plan which ties I want to use, one of these is going to show on the front here, and one of these is going to show on the back and the flap. So I need to get one of each out of a tie that I want to show off the most. I think that the ones I want to show off the most are these 2 purpley ones. And then those inside layers, I think will be these navies. The 2 that I want to show off the most that are going to be the outside, I think I should interface those. So I'm going to trace these shapes right onto my interfacing. Okay, and then I'll just loosely cut out around those. And then I'm going to iron it onto the back of my 2 main ties. So my interfacing is on, and now I'm layering those pieces on top of their partner pieces. And I definitely don't want these silky layers to shift around, so I think I'll put in a few pins. And now with my good rotary cutter or with scissors, I'm just going to cut right on that line through all the layers. All right, so these fold in half and make the inside pockets. So I just ran these 3 pieces to the iron, folded them in half with right side out, and gave a good crisp press to the top. So we've got all the cutting done for the main pieces, but the very first sewing step is to secure these little belt loops in between the layers. And these little belt loops are what the strap itself anchors to. And it's kind of nice to do it that way because if I put the strap itself right into that seam, it's going to naturally squish the flap. It's going to come straight up there and squish the flap. But if we have it coming out sideways first on that belt loop and then coming up straight, then the flap can lay more flat, doesn't get squished, right? Okay, so I need to cut the little belt loops, but I think I will also at this point cut the strip that I want to use to wrap around this kind of skinny webbing. This is about 3/8 of an inch wide or a little less than a centimeter. So I want to cut a strip so that I can wrap the fabric around and sew it down. It won't be difficult, but I do need that long piece because this strap is about 60 inches long. So I want to create, first of all, these little kind of belt loops. Some ties do come with a little, almost like a belt loop on the back of it. So I could use that, or I could just make my own. I also want to pipe these edges, so I'll need a piece for piping as well. So that is the beauty of working with a tie, is that it is already on the bias. It makes beautiful piping, binding, all of that. I've got the tie folded in half here so that I can cut 2 layers at once. Let's just cut our strip for the strap. I need about 1.25 inches, 3 centimeters, maybe a tiny bit more. So that's perfect for the strap. For the piping, I'm just going to need a strip that's about 1 inch wide. I did cut the little piece to make the belt loop, so I cut this 2 inches wide, and this is for 2 of them. That's about 7 inches long. I did put a little strip of interfacing down the middle of it, and then while I was at the iron, I just folded it into 4. So at the machine, I'll just sew those 2 folded edges together. And then I cut another strip of that webbing, and I'm just going to be wrapping this piece around. So let's head over to the machine with these pieces. So first of all, those little belt loop pieces. Not bad. I'll give that a little press and then I'll cut that into two. And I do need to make sure I'm laying this webbing onto the wrong side of the fabric. And even if you think that the right and wrong sides are almost the same, you are going to be encountering those little seams, and that's where it's really going to matter. So to start, I'm just laying this right on the edge of my bias strip, and I'll just sew right down the middle of this piece. I don't want to pull the bias. I don't want to stretch it because it becomes skinnier, right? And then I just won't have enough to wrap around neatly. I've turned the webbing down to the inside and pressed that flat. And now I'm just turning the little edge that remains, and it's a pretty little edge. I could have definitely been more generous on that inch and, what was it, 1.25 inches that I cut? So I'm turning under that little edge now. So I've got the webbing in there, fold it in, and then the second edge comes over just to meet it, and now I'll be able to wrap that around and sew that down. I think I might just use a zigzag stitch just so I have a bit more coverage as I come along that seam. So my zigzag is 3.5 millimeters wide and 2.5 millimeters long. And there we go. Now it's easy. Okay, that makes a nice strap. All right, I'll give that a little press too, just to set in the thread. So the strap came out nicely. That looks great, and it feels nice. It feels quite solid and substantial. It feels strong, but we're not going to put it in yet. I'm going to just get those belt loops in place, and I want these to be 3 inches long. There we go, 3 inches long each. And then I just ran to the iron and pressed these 2 little belt loops in half. I want to sew a rectangle here. It does a couple of things. It joins those 2 middle pieces together, but it also gives you this little inside pocket, which I think is just kind of the perfect place to slot a credit card or 2. Let's come in 1.25 inches on both sides, or 3 centimeters, and I'm going to draw a line there. And 1.25 on this side. Okay, so I'll come across right about there. I might not want these to be able to flap open too much, so I'll just do a line straight across there. So I'll sew 3 sides of that rectangle to create that credit card pocket, and then I'll sew another line down here. One important thing is, though, that I want those top folds to be lined up nicely together. And I'll just follow my soap line. And then I'll sew that little bit across the bottom as well. Don't make the same mistake I just did. After you draw your soap line, that's when you're supposed to slip your little belt loops in there. But if you do get overexcited the way I just did, and you forget that step, just open up a few stitches, slip that in there. Just enough to get caught in there securely. So I've got about 1/4 inch sticking in there. And then I'll just sew that closed. I'll make sure those are level. That seems good. So now my 2 center layers are connected and the little folded part of the belt loop is sticking out. So now you can see there's that central pocket. Now we're ready to start putting it together. And there are a few ways you can put it together. So I sewed mine just right sides together so the seam is visible in there. Another way is to sew them with the seams on the outside. So you're just sewing your layers together. Raw edges would be here and then binding it. And if you wanted to bind it, you can use the tie strips. You just want to cut it wider. I would probably want to cut it 2 inches wide and you would bind the edges. But I think the piping is going to work. And it's a little bit more advanced in the way I'm going to have to turn it and flip it, but I'll take you through it and you can give it a try if you want to. So if you want to do piping, you need to have some kind of piping cord. And I just found this little skinny cord in my stash. I also have string like this, but I don't like this as much because it's not as smooth a texture and it's also a little bit thick, but it would do in a pinch. But this is going to be perfect. Lay it onto the wrong side of my strip. And then with the zipper foot, I'm just going to be sewing right beside it. There is such a thing as a piping foot. I don't have one. I've never felt the need for one. So let me just show you how I do it with the zipper foot. Okay, so with my zipper foot, I'll just be sewing a regular stitch. When I'm sewing the piping to the bag, I will move the needle over to the left a little bit to be closer to that piping. But for this first time through, I guess I just leave the needle in the center. Okay, so that'll do. So what I have here are my two interface pieces. This is the front and this is the back and flap. And these are the two pieces that I'll be putting the piping on. This one, I'm going to go all the way around and I'll show you how I'm going to overlap at the bottom. And this one, I just want to put it on half, just going up to that fold. So when you lay the piping on there, it's all the raw edges together and the piping cord lays toward the inside. And because it's on the bias, it just goes around the curves so nicely. You can make little snips in here, or if you're going around a right angle or a V, make those little snips and it'll just lay even nicer. At the top here, I want the piping to just come right up to that fold and then nip into the seam allowance. And like that. Good. So this one, we're going all the way around. These are just going to kind of drift off like that. So one kind of drifts off that way and one overlaps and goes that way. Good. All right. So it's back to the machine and using that zipper foot still. So I will move my needle over to the left a little bit so that I'm closer to the piping. I don't want that first line of stitching to show. So that's why I wasn't moving my needle over to the left in that step. But on this step, I think I'm ready to do that. And I want that to almost make like a little right angle right up that fold. Good, so there's one done. I love it. I'll start at that overlap. So I sew straight across and just catch those edges as they're tucking in. Okay, that looks good. So when that turns, it'll just be the piping out at the edge, which I think is quite nice. So now it's time to assemble everything, which I think is a little, it's a little crazy the way I'm going to do this. What I want to do is take the top layer of this middle section, and I'm going to enclose those raw edges inside these raw edges. I'm going to lay my inside pieces on top of this part of the bag, and I'm going to pin these pieces so that they are out of the way. Yeah, I think that'll do. This top layer of the innards is all out of my way, and now I'm going to close this up, and I want to close it with those edges nicely meeting at the top. And kaboom, we are closed. Good. Well, that's awesome. Now I just sew on the exact same line. I do need to leave a little opening at the bottom to turn the whole thing through, or I could leave that opening at the side. I might go for the side because you do want a straight section. Never leave your opening at a curve or a corner. I think right in here is probably a good spot. Again, I'll put double clips at one end of the opening and at the other, just so I remind myself. That's it. Okay. Okay, so I'm just sewing right on that same line and still with the zipper foot because that piping is still in there. I think I would have forgot to leave a gap there if those double clips hadn't been there. Okay, that seems to have gone well. So I can trim off the edges of my piping. Along these curves, you can, if your heart desires, you can cut out little triangles. I don't have that kind of patience, so I'm just cutting close to my curve. And along the straight edge, I don't really need to trim off anything at all. All we're doing here is just reducing the amount of bulk that's there on those curves. So now it all should pop out nicely through there. Why is there a raw edge here? Oh, that's right. There is a rough edge from the other side. I scared myself. Oh, looky there. Oh, I missed a corner. I do have to go back in and get that. This corner looks good. Curves look good. Oh, dangity dang. Missed an edge there. Oh, that's my opening. Okay, so I missed one little bit of edge and one corner. But I feel excited. I feel good because I love the look of the piping there. Okay, I'm going to fix those two bits. Okay, that's got it. That's the opening that probably will just catch by hand right there. Little ladder stitch-ish. I'll just do this quick. Alrighty, so now we're almost ready to finish the sandwich with this piece laying right side up. I'm going to lay the whole assembly on there, but this time I'm going to make it a little bit easier on myself and sew these layers together first before I connect it to the one with the piping, just so I can manage all these slippery layers a little bit better. I clip my edges together. I'll just be sewing those raw edges using the regular presser foot since I don't have to deal with piping here, but still a small seam allowance. Okay, so this part of the assembly is all ready. I've folded in this finished front part and the belt loops and pinned that flat. Now the piped piece is going to come right side together with the whole thing. Sew around on the same line again. Leave a gap in the straight section. And then turn it out, and then all the hard part will be done. All right, I've got the zipper foot. And I've got the needle to the left. That was proving to be a little tricky, so I've got it flipped over. Try it this way up. That feels better for some reason. I don't know, that just feels better. I think I would be enjoying this step more if I had just cut a rectangle and then sewed my piece onto that rectangle and then trimmed off the corner. I'm not enjoying this moment of my life. Okay, phew. Now, trimming off around those curves. There's not really a lot to trim off there. Should be able to turn that all out nicely. Almost. And oh my goodness, I think we're looking at a thing of beauty here. Okay. Oh, goodness me. There's the gap. We know that's going to clean up nicely. That is cool. Phew, I'm so glad I love it. I was worried there for a second, but I think I love it. All right, I'm going to clean this up, give it a press. The strap goes on, magnetic closure, almost done. So cute, right? Oh, I love it. Oh, I love it. So same thing as before, just a little whip stitch or ladder stitch in here. The little end of the strap goes up the belt loop and then down and then attach. So by going up that way first, instead of going down, that means we have the little seam toward the inside instead of on the outside. I'm also going to make sure my strap is not twisted. Okay, I got lucky there. I'm also going to try it on and make sure that this is a good length because I'm not making it adjustable. So I did just try it on and it was a little long. I took off a couple inches. So my total strap length, including these little folds, is about 52 inches. So just a couple of back tacks like that to secure it. Okay, I'm excited. I'm like the horse running for the barn right now. We're just almost done and it's so pretty. What a beautiful gift. I love it. Alrighty, so one of our magnetic closures goes to that side. And you know what I should have done is put a little bit of interfacing just at the one end of this lining piece. That would have been good. So I'm going to have to sort of dig in a tiny bit into the interfacing on the other side. So I don't want my stitches to show at all, but I don't want to just sew to this one layer of silk. That's not going to be good. So what I've done there is just hidden my knot underneath the button. And so this just does sew on like a button or a press snap, same thing. But it's just so neat that they're magnetic. I love it. Okay, and flop it down. You can assume that there's going to be some things in here. We don't want to pull it down tight. We want to give a little bit of room and then just make a note of where the other one goes. And again, I want to hide my knot under it. Now I don't have to worry about my stitches showing through. I can go right through this whole layer and be just fine. And just like that, we are done. Oh my gosh. It's a good thing I love it because that was not easy. That is definitely the most challenging of the whole batch, but it's just so lovely. I absolutely adore it. And I thought I was done there, but then this book arrived in the mail. One of the members from my online sewing community posted in our chat about this book, Omiyagi by Kumiko Sudo, Handmade Gifts from Fabric in the Japanese Tradition. And it's full of really, really pretty little pouches and things that you use to give gifts in. So I found this daffodil one and I immediately got to work and made it. And it's just so sweet, but it's absolutely tiny. They do give patterns. This is the pattern for it. And that triangle is just too big to fit onto a tie, even at the widest point. So I made an equilateral triangle that's a little bit smaller. This is just 8.5 across, and I think the one that's mentioned there is 9.5, but it's just so pretty. This one I made out of quilting cotton and a little bit of silk, and I used those little tie ends like I did recently on a dress. I just love it. It's so sweet. But I want to try it again and make it bigger, more useful. And so I'm going to actually make it out of 3 different triangles. So these would be 3 different fabrics, and I'll still use this white silk as a lining. First, we need to draw a pattern that's an equilateral triangle, and I'll show you how to do that. Alrighty, so this is just one piece of computer paper, so we know that that is 8.5 inches wide. I'm going to fold that in half. 8.5 inches is equal to 21.5 centimeters. So now with it opened up again, I want to make these sides the same as that. So I want it 8.5 inches, right? Or 21.5 centimeters. There's my center. So now I just want to go from the corner to where my ruler hits at 8.5. And double check this side, 8.5 from point to point there. So that's all you need to do to get an equilateral triangle. So now I've got 3 ties here, and I can just barely fit my triangle on there. In fact, I better flip it to have the smallest one facing up so that I know I'm getting it right on there. And of course, I just realized that 3 does not make a triangle. And so I'm going to cut that middle one out of the same white lining that I'm going to use because I have no ties left. So now I can flip these 2 and those get sewn right side together. And then those ones will get sewn right sides together. And then the top one will go on. So let's take that to the machine. So I'm just using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, just the edge of my presser foot. And then I just ran to the iron and pressed those seams open and flat to make it a little easier to sew this 3rd piece on. 4th piece. I think that's really pretty. Now I'm going to put it right side down onto the scrappy end of a piece of silk lining. Well, it's just a nice piece of silk, really. So I'm pinning it right sides together. And then I'm going to cut the lining exactly the same as the triangle. Alrighty, and now I'm going to sew around those pieces right side together just like that. And I'll leave a gap. I'll put double pins as a reminder. And I don't really want the gap anywhere near a seam or near a corner. So just like that'll be great. So starting at 1 set of double pins. Now with these pointy corners, this could be a really nice place to use that trick. This is one of the TikTok techniques that I tested out maybe about a year ago. It was meant for collars, but this will be the perfect time to use it. Let me show you that. So when you get to your corner, you can lift up, place a thread just between your layers and kind of snuggle it up right against the needle. Yes, and then it's 1 stitch over that thread, and then you bring that thread back around and tuck it in. So it's just in place, it's sort of sewn into that point, and then you keep going. So it's there. I'm going to slip my thread underneath, snug it up against the needle, 1 stitch over the thread, and then turn and keep going with that thread all tucked in. Alrighty, and now you can see my little thread in there. I'm going to try not to cut it, but I do want to trim off my points here just to reduce the bulk out of those corners, and then turn it all through that gap. So there's one of my threads. I grab both ends and pull that point. That's pretty nice. And then if I just pull one end of the thread, I think that one got sewn in. That's okay. Good. It does make a beautiful point. And then that's how it's supposed to be. Just pull that right out. That's gorgeous. And then this is the one where I don't have that thread. And I wish I did. It's so much easier with that thread. So there's a bonus tip from an old video. So my point turner does an okay job, but that thread is better. So now I want to push the seam out right to the edge and press that nice and flat all the way around. Now here's the gap, but I'm not even going to worry about it. It's going to get dealt with in the process. So now it's going to be coming in like this. And so we just kind of have to decide how big we want these petals. I'm folding those points in like this. Oh, you know what? How about that? I'll bring the point to there. Perfect. And then we sew a little casing straight across here. Okay. Back to the machine. I'll go, I don't know, 1/2 inch, 1 centimeter, somewhere in there. I think that rippling will come out at the iron. That one's nicer. Good. I'm going to just be sewing nice and close to the edge. So I'm bringing the two petals kind of together right at the corner. That's the gap that I left. You could definitely close that up with a needle and thread. So on this little one, I did an edge stitch, but this is quilting cotton, which is crisp. And so that edge stitch here wasn't too difficult to do. But on this silky silk, it's a little slippery. It's a lot slippery. So I think I'm going to hand stitch these little sides together. So I'll do all 3 sides like this. And here you can really see, if you're not familiar with the ladder stitch, you can really see that as I go back and forth from side to side, it makes the rungs of a ladder because you just go straight across. You travel within that fold. There's the rungs of the ladder. And then when you pull your thread tight, it just disappears. So nice. Up here, a little knot just by going back through my loop. Tighten that up. Do that a couple of times. And then before I cut my thread, I put my needle back in, come out anywhere, and pull my thread tight so that when I snip that thread, the tail is inside, and that just looks so nice on the outside. It's so interesting. I love the whole concept. If you have a cord or a ribbon, you could use that as your drawstring here. For this little one, I made my own drawstring using that same silk, just cutting a bias strip. But for this one, because I have all these strips of bias here in the ties, I think I will try to make one out of the tie. So the length that I want would be twice this, plus enough to dangle. So I would say I'd probably want my cord to be 12 inches on the fold, so 24 inches. And I just want my strip to be 1 inch wide, or 2.5 centimeters. So now I just fold that in half, right side together, and I just try to sew right down the middle of it. And then you want to use a loop turner on this. So you open that loop turner up, push it all the way through. At the top end here, I'll just trim away some of the seam allowance and the threads. You've got that finger and thumb here. You want to take the thumb and poke it right out through the fabric so that the finger and thumb can grab it like that. And then you just gently push it off the end, and there we go. Okay, well, that's nice. And then to finish those ends with those cute little flowers, I'm going to take the other 2 ties and just cut 2-inch squares. So that's 2 inches or 5 centimeters. I'll just do one and then put it through the casing and then do the other. So I take my little square, wrap it right side together. I'm going to be sewing right over the square, including the cord, but then this end that's a little further away from the end of the string, I'm going to leave that end free. So I've sewn over the cord here, but I'll stop before the cord here. So I'll trim off a little bit of the excess around that corner and my threads. And then we pull that square all the way down so that it turns right side out. There. And pull that little corner out. Good. Okay. And now we pull the string back to be kind of folding that flower in half. So it just comes to the point like that. So pretty. And then I'm going to sew straight across here. And then the square flips the other way. And then you can leave this part long if you like to be kind of like a piston of a flower. You can have that knot showing or tucked in, whatever you prefer. And of course, you don't have to do this flower part. You can just do a knot or a bead or whatever you like there. And now I can take the other end, attach it to the biggest safety pin that I have that will still fit through these casings. On the little one, my casings were so tiny that I didn't have a safety pin that would fit through. So I had to attach the cord to a needle and thread and then push the needle through backwards. And that worked out fine as well. Good. All right. So to finish the other end now, I think I will use the same tie rather than bringing in the third one. So one more 2-inch square and then the same idea. So we anchor it at the end that's closer to the end of the cord. And then leave that end free. Trim. Slide it down. Pull out that little corner. Slide it halfway back up and then sew across the end. And then bring that little bit down. So cute. Then a knot and then this one is done. There we go. That is just exquisite. You can just snug it up like that and that makes just such a beautiful pouch to give a gift in. It's a gift in itself. It's so pretty. But it is just a lovely little thing, isn't it? So sweet.
Well, that was quite a journey. Thank you so much for being with me right till the end. I hope you love all of these little gifts as much as I do. They were all so much fun to make, and they really just felt like such a beautiful craft. It just felt special to be working with this silk and to be making these cute little, really useful gifts. I think my favorite was the bag, and of course it was the hardest. I struggled with that. It's clearly something special, something handmade, made from treasured fabrics. I just am really happy with all of them. I hope you enjoyed that as well. I hope you make some beautiful gifts. And if you have a favorite or if you try one, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear. So happy gift giving, everybody. And until next time on Catherine Sews, you take care.